Okay, so here's the vote this morning. And Marcy already asked, am I in this picture? See, I tricked you a couple weeks ago. Which I'm in the picture. Which one am I? I'm the least happy one with the tan. The one of a different color. Yeah, as we were growing up, this is me and my two brothers. I'm the middle of three brothers. As we were growing up, I looked so different from my two brothers that they used to joke that I was adopted. And so, as a kid, you say, stop that, just stop that, But, when summer would come around and the sun would come out and we'd be playing outside, I took on a tan really darn fast and they burned and got red and pink. And so we have some Native Americans in our past, and a couple of us popped up in the genetic pool, and suddenly when the sun comes out, boom, we just get dark. That's just the way it is. I don't know why, but all of the pictures I have as a kid, there's these two little white kids and some other kid. And that's me. So that's why are we doing this today? And in fact, that's my brother John on the left, and my brother Rich on the right, and my dad. And this is about 1957 is what I figured from doing that. So he looks like a teenager. Yeah, he almost is. Yeah. Wow. And just 10 years before that, my dad was fighting airplanes in World War II. Just 10 years before that. So. You have a question?
Yeah. One used to live in Lansing, Michigan.
Uh-huh. The one that used to live in Lansing, Michigan is the one that's on the right, my brother Rich. Yeah, he lived
right.
Okay. Right.
What about the left one?
He lived in Alaska.
Oh,
You're getting the whole family. Okay, why are we doing this today? Well, because we're talking about sons and fathers and that whole meme that comes out of the Old Testament. So today we're looking at the whole idea of what it means for sons and fathers. So remember, this is what we're doing. We're talking about the fact that we use these concepts, these memes from the Old Testament, and I'm not sure we really understand what they mean. And they come up a lot. You see these a lot in the New Testament, and they're actually taken out of the Old Testament. So these are Old Testament concepts, but they're not totally foreign to us. I mean, we know what sons and fathers are, right? But so we should be able to interpret this. And that's part of the problem is when you read it in the New Testament, you presume you know what they're talking about. And, for some of them like today, 80%, you know what it means. You've got it. But some of them like last week, we talked about firstborn. That's something we don't talk about in our culture much. So that's a pretty foreign kind of concept. And next week, we're going to be talking about a foreign concept, the Word. Remember John 1:1, in the beginning was the Word? Well, what is that about? So we got to talk about that some. So this week, Father, Son, and interestingly enough, last week when we looked at firstborn, we were being too literal in our interpretation. We thought firstborn mean the one that was born first. Well, it seldom is, but when it's used in the Old and New Testament, it's the ancient characteristics of the firstborn, the chiefliness of the firstborn. That's really, you have to take it a little less literally in that particular sense, because that's how it's used almost entirely in this metaphorical sense, the chief and first of the firstborn. But today the issue is we don't take it literally enough rather than too literally with the sons and fathers. So we'll look at that today. It's a little easier, so we'll go a little faster today. So father and son. And there we are again. Yes, I'm the unhappy one in the center. By the way, I started to wonder if I was actually adopted for years. And so when I was I don't know, about 10 or 11 years old, I was sitting at the dining room table once. We're having our meal, and I looked down at my mother's left hand. And I suddenly realized that she has something on her left hand that I have on my left hand also. And that something is I don't have a knuckle on my pinky finger. I was just born that way. I have knuckle, nothing. It's just two bones that come together. There's no covering. And when I looked at her hand and I saw that on her left hand on the same finger, I said, I'm not adopted. Oh, I was so relieved. And then as the years went on, I found out a whole bunch of other traits that I get from my mom, it turned out. We'll talk a little bit about that as we go on. But that's what we're talking. So here's the conundrum. You get into the New Testament, especially about Jesus, you get several phrases that could look kind of confusing. So let me just look at those, and I'll show you what the problem is, why we don't quite do this right. My clicker's not working. There he goes. For instance, in John 6, Jesus is having a very spirited discussion with the Pharisees. If you haven't read John 6, boy, it'll just curl curl your hair. He's there with the Pharisees, and the Pharisee says, well, is this not Jesus, the son of Joseph, whose father and mother we know? So how does he now say, I've come down from heaven? Right? We're talking about fatherhood, where he comes from. So here's one section where he's called the son of Joseph, which is literally true. His father's name was Joseph. But then you keep reading the New Testament, and you get like to Matthew 4:3. This is Satan tempting Jesus in the wilderness. And the tempter, that's Satan, came to him and said, if you are the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread. So not only is he the son of Joseph, he's the Son of God, which we're very familiar with. But so which one is it? Son of Joseph, Son of God? But wait, there's more. You get to Matthew 26. This is Jesus talking to his apostles. You know that after 2 days the Passover is coming, and the Son of Man will be delivered up to be crucified. Is he talking about somebody else? No, he's talking about himself. The same person who's called the Son of Man. So he's also the Son of Man. So what? But it means something that we don't quite catch when we just look at it that way. And then lastly, a blind man cries out to Jesus, and he cries out and says, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. So he's also the Son of David? So which one is it? Well, it's all of them. But how do we may be missing something if you look at that list on the right, on the left, and you can't quite put together what the significance of the different son ofs mean. So that's what we're going to look at today. See if we can kind of put that together and figure out how this goes. There's some other stuff in the New Testament. For instance, regarding the followers of Jesus, John, especially in his first letter, he says, see what kind of love the Father has given to us, that we should be called children of God. And so we are. The reason why the world doesn't know us is that it did not know him. So we're actually called the children of God. But in what sense are we talking children of God, right? It's like the sons. Sons are specifically and culturally males, but now we're talking just in general sense, males and females. We're called the children of God. And something about John's voice when he says this, he's sort of amazed. And he should be. I mean, every commentator who knows the Greek looks at that and says, it's what kind of love the Father has given us that we should be called children of God. And not just called, but we are. Yeah, okay, so if you don't, he's amazed, but we don't know enough about the children of God to be amazed with him. So we're going to try and put some feet on that. And then one last one here in John 1, as John opens his gospel, he says about Jesus, but to all who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. So children of God is not something we're born with, but something pivotal about believing in Jesus allows you to become a child of God. So we need to just find out what that's all about, because this whole son, father, child thing, we need to put some legs on this. So let's take a look. Now, if you go back in the Old Testament, this is what we've been doing in the series. You go back in the Old Testament and you look at the words for father and son. Actually, you may know these already. The father is Af or Ab, A-B or Av is actually more of a hard V in the Hebrew. And if you know names in the Old Testament, you see it come up all the time. Abraham, the A-B, father. That means father. So the A-B always means father. And the son, you know this as well too. It comes out pronounced Bain, but actually we see it as Ben. And so Ben actually means son. Famous movie Ben-Hur with Charlton Heston. Ben-Hur, son of Hur. Yeah, see, you're a scholar, it's just like that. By the way, was Hur a real person in the Bible? Yes. Did you know that? Yeah, go back in the Old Testament, you'll find it. And actually the phrase Ben-Hur is in the Old Testament. Oh, so the son of Hur. So that's what we're talking about. Now that gives me absolutely no insight into solve my New Testament problem. So you start cruising through the Old Testament and you just start looking at fathers and sons and children. You see how it's used, and this is what you find. For instance, when you get to Genesis 9:18, at the time of the flood, the sons of Noah who went forth from the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Ham was the father of Canaan. These three were the sons of Noah, and from these the people of the whole earth were dispersed. So in this particular sense, sons of means sons of. It just means literally the sons of. Just like that, the picture we started with, I'm a son of my father. It's literally human sons. And this is how it's used predominantly in the entire Old Testament. The sons of is a literal sons of. So if you go to Matthew 1, you see it again. Matthew starts off his gospel, very first two verses, the book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David and the son of Abraham. Okay, now wait a second. Was Jesus a son of David and a son of Abraham? Well, when we're going to talk genealogies, because see, here's where Matthew goes next. Abraham was the father of Isaac, and Isaac was the father of Jacob, and Jacob was the father of Judah, and his brother, and he goes, and he goes on and on and on. He does his genealogy. So it's not just a direct son in that particular sense. It can mean, like he's talking about here, that Jesus was a descendant of Abraham, and he's going to prove it in the next couple verses, and also a son, literally, and a descendant of David, literally, blood. So not only does it mean, the immediate descendant, the son of a man or a woman, not just that, but it also means ancestors too. So the length of this kind of blood connection goes far back. So that's literal. Literal in that particular sense. It can mean a descendant. If you go to Psalm 146, you see kind of the same thing. Put not your trust in princes, in a son of man, in whom there's no salvation. When his breath departs, he returns to the earth, and on that very day his plans perish. So in that particular sense, what is a son of man? You're a son of humanity is a good way to look at it. You're a human being with flesh and blood that came from your ancestors back. You're human. So a son of man, in the literal sense, that's what he's saying right here. Don't put your trust in people who are people, because when they die, their plans go with them. They can't do anything for you. There's nothing supernatural about them. It's when they die, they die. So just don't put your trust in princes or son of man. So clearly the way he's using it here is that not only can we be a descendant of our parents in first generation, son of David, son of Abraham, it can be extended to talking about your blood descendancy from someone way back, and all the way back to Adam. Because when you look at that phrase right there, son of Adam, in the Hebrew it says Ben Adam. Because the word for man in the Old Testament is Adam. It's Adam. So literally, what in these three that we've looked at so far, this whole idea about the son of really just means blood descendant. It can be from your immediate parents, or it can be from several generations back, or it can be all the way back to the beginning of humanity. I'm a blood descendant of Adam. So that's what he's getting at right here. So that's the most obvious way. That's the dominant way the son of is used in the Old Testament. So as our thinking woman meme considers his father's son, you go through the whole Old Testament, and this is the dominant idea. The son and the father and the children, it's all about your origins. It's all about your origins. Where did you come from? In that first picture this morning, I come from my mom and dad. There's my dad right there. My mom's behind the camera. I am a son of them. I'm also a son of my grandparents and my ancestors way back. My grandfather made booze up in the hills of Kentucky and ran them during the Prohibition. I'm descended from him. Okay, so you are sort of this by blood, and then all the way back by blood, way back to who knows whom, but biblically back to Adam even. So it's all about that. Now this is without question. And that's why you have to be literal. It's the dominant and overwhelming use of the son-father idea in the Old Testament. I mean, it's almost everything. It's literal blood descendancy is what it is. So it is. It's just everywhere. If you, like I mentioned before, you can do this yourself if you have a little bit of Bible software, or go online. There's some online tools that are on web pages. Blue Letter Bible, Bible Hub, there's several of them. And you can say, show me everywhere in the Old Testament where the phrase son of shows up, and you'll be blown away, because it's a lot. It's a lot in the Old Testament. Almost every single use is about descendancy, blood descendancy. It just is. It makes sense. That's what I was saying before. We need to be more literal today, because when you see son of in the Old Testament, it literally means blood descendants. Nothing metaphorical. Sons of anarchy. Metaphorical, not origins, not descendancy of blood, but something else, right? And we use that kind of metaphorical term a lot now. The Old Testament, almost not at all. It literally means blood descendancy. It's our origin. Now, if you do look really hard, you can find a couple places where it's metaphorical. It's not just blood descendancy. Job says, who is first given to me that I should repay him? This is God speaking. Whatever is under the whole heaven is mine. That's God speaking. And then again about God, verse 34, he sees everything that is high. He is king over all the sons of pride. Well, there's one of those sons of anarchy kind of ideas. So God oversees all of humanity, which he calls euphemistically the sons of pride. Now that makes a lot of sense because we read Isaiah 53 this morning. All we like sheep have gone astray, gone to his own way. When we go on our own way, instead of being a sheep that's created by a creator and a shepherd, when we go our own way, the thing that motivates us is pride. I'll have nothing to do with you. So in this particular sense, Job, speaking for God, says God oversees all of mankind. And you know what his catchphrase for you is? Sons of pride. And it's actually quite fitting because we all are sons of pride. But why sons of pride? Why did he just say prideful people? Well, because in a real sense, again, the sons of tells you a little bit about inheritance. I've inherited this tendency toward pride from the ones who've gone before me, literally from the fall, all the way back to Adam. So there is, when you see sons of, there is sort of an inherency idea, but in this particular case, what we inherited is not our blood or our position. What we inherited was the tendency toward pride and rebellion. So it's used like that there. So there's sons of pride. I found another one. These are hard to find. Jeremiah 48. It has destroyed the forehead of Moab, the crown of the sons of tumult. Well, I don't want to tell you what that whole passage is about. You can read it later. But he uses this whole idea of sons of tumult. Tumult is a gigantic catastrophe and stuff like that. A tsunami is a tumult, right? So he calls these the sons of tumult. Well, okay, I get that. Again, it's sort of the metaphorical, I've inherited tumult from someone else that was caused upstream from me, but I'm also part of it, right? Well, I'll give you one more, and this one's actually from the New Testament, if I can get my clicker to work. Oh, wait, here we go. New Testament, Jesus appoints the 12, and Mark makes a list. James, the son of Zebedee, John, the brother of James, to whom he gave the name Boanerges. I can't say that right. That is, sons of thunder. So it's interesting because in the same sentence, he talks about not only the fact that these guys are the sons of Zebedee, literal blood descendancy, but also because of their characteristics, they're the sons of thunder. And there's been great speculation about what that means. Were they loudmouths? Probably. Although when you read the New Testament, if I was going to give that title to anyone, I'd give it to Peter. Because he was the guy who always was sticking his foot in his mouth. You know, maybe he didn't say it loud enough, but he said stupid things all the time. And forever and ever, he will be remembered by the followers of Jesus as the guy who always said the wrong thing first. Wouldn't you hate to have been the guy who's going to have that documented and everyone in the world knows that forever? Again, with these things, what you're seeing is not a literal blood descendancy. What you're seeing is an inheritance of a trait that you manifest, right? So like for me and my mom, we don't have knuckles on our left pinkies. You know, you could call us sons of no knuckle pinkies, which is a trait. Actually, it's a trait. It's not necessarily, but it still is it's an inheritance. I inherited this from her. I also inherited a sixth toe on my left foot. That's where the knuckle went. And to this, you know, and I would tell my mom, you listen, I got this from you, so that must have come from, and oh, no, we don't have any of those in our family. No, I'm sorry. Don't have any of those. In a lot of cultures, that's, by the way, that's a bad sign to have extra digits. And so I can show you it when we get, we took it off, or we'd never have a pair of shoes that fit because you'd have to have a hole coming out of the side. So anyway, sons of thunder. So let's try John 8. Oh, well, here you are, Erica. I knew it was coming sooner or later. Yeah. Jesus, again, another spirited debate with the Pharisees in John 8. Boy, John 8's incredible. You are of your father, the devil, and your will is to do your father's desires. So there, you can even see right there, you are of your father, the devil. That's actually an inheritance statement, son of. And your will is to do the Father's desires. So since you display the fact that you do your Father's desires, that makes you a child of that Father. It's an inheritance of a trait, see? And he goes on and explains it. He was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in the truth because there is no truth in him. When he lies, again, we're talking Satan, when he lies, he speaks out of his own character, for he's a liar and the father of lies. And so when Jesus is seeing the Pharisees lying, he's saying, you're showing me the traits of the fact that you are a child of your father, Satan. Now, read John 8. I didn't have a chance to put it all up here. The conversation gets very spirited after this point. And they debate about whose father is whose father. They even, this is kind of I'll mess up the plot for you, but even in parts of this discussion that come after this, spoiler alert, here we go. Jesus says that they're of their father Satan, and then they come back with the snappy retort, well, you were born out of wedlock to your father. Remember how Mary and Joseph in the very, so they actually bring that up. They remember this now 30 years after the fact. You're born in, and then it gets even more heated. Jesus doesn't have his snappy come back with just, oh yeah, and they go, oh yeah, it's pretty wild. So yeah, read John 8. It's really something else. But the central theme is whose father is whose father. That's what it's all about. So secondarily, and this is just the second point of this entire thing, it's not only our origin, but it's our traits that reveal the nature of who we are. So although that's used in a smaller percentage of the Old Testament, it's largely blood ancestry when we talk about sons of. There is some of this characteristics and traits, which for us, that's the dominant theme in the 21st century, is that, son of something. Sons of anarchy mean that they're all into anarchy, right? So they're not kind and gentle sort of people. They're traits that we're talking about. So literally, when we look at the passages in the New Testament where we're talking about son of, with Jesus, remember? Son of God, son of man, son of Joseph, son of, what's the last one? David, okay. We need to think, if you're thinking Old Testament, we need to think actually more literally rather than metaphorically, because that's how it's used in the Old Testament. I mean, literally. Now, with the son of David, son of Abraham, literally there's a blood inheritance, so that works okay. Son of man, well, yeah, Jesus is as much man as he is God. So there actually is a blood inheritance of humanity because he's man. And son of Joseph because he's from Joseph. So let's see if we can apply some of this stuff right now and go back, because that's our whole insight. You got to think literal. Son of, when you see the phrase in the New Testament. I mean, literal. And again, in the 21st century, we're prone to go metaphorical. But it's always used literal. Almost always. And I had to, those two in the Old Testament I found were the only ones I could find in the Old Testament out of 1,000 references to son of. So it's just not a dominant theme like we would have it dominant, right? You got to think more literal. So let's try and think more literal on some of these. So John 1, he opens, but to all who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. Literally children of God. Not just metaphorically children of God, but literally. Well, to be literally a child of God, that means that I have to have been born of God. Is it starting to ring some bells to you? Look what precedes and comes after this verse. It'll give a little insight. If you is it origin or trait we're talking about? He came to his own, and his own people did not receive him. His own people, the Jews, were Jews. They were children of God by blood descendancy. They came from Israel. See? It says that Jesus came, and he came to his own blood descendants, the children of God, but they didn't accept him. But it turns out that all who did accept him, who received him, and believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God literally. Because the first phrase before that is literal as well. Look what comes after. For us who believe, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. And that's his way of saying, when you receive him and you believe in him and you're a child of God, you are literally a child of God because you've gone through another birth process, literally. And how does that birth process happen that you're literally a child of God? See it? You weren't born of blood or the will of the flesh or the will of man. That's all just normal birth. But you're born of the will of God. God himself births you. Now, again, we'll read this and our modern minds click into modern metaphor thinking. And what John is trying to do is tell you, no, don't go metaphorical thinking. This is literal. You are literally the child of God because you have gone through another birth process. And that other birth process is deliberately from God himself. And he's trying to drill that home in that last verse. And he's drilled it home for me. Don't go metaphorical. Stay literal. You've been born. Another time. 1 John 3 we looked at. See what kind of love the Father has given to us that we should be called children of God, and so we are. And the question here is that why would it be such an event of love for God to look at you and call you a child of God? Why, can't he just be like a nice grandfather or something who's giving you sort of the metaphorical phrase, the child of God? Actually, literally, God's going out of his way to demonstrate his love to you by pointing at you and saying, you're my child. Literally. Now, why does that have anything to do with love? It's the interesting question right here. Well, because you neither have the blood descendancy nor the traits to qualify as a child of God. You don't have either one. Either one. And yet, he's given you birth, and you're a child of God. That's why it's an astonishing statement for him. You don't have the blood descendancy, and you're not demonstrating any of the traits of God at all. Always loving, always patient, all that kind of. You're not demonstrating any of those traits, and yet he's looked at you and said, you're my child. Now, there's always this idea in the inheritance of traits that children will kind of demonstrate what their parents were like. That's always kind of the thought in all this sort of stuff. Like, for instance, if you had someone like Bill Gates. You have Bill Gates who, built this gigantic company in Microsoft and stuff like that. And say Bill Gates adopts a child as an infant, and that child grows up in Bill Gates' household. You can always say, well, yeah, he is Bill Gates' son or daughter because he's been adopted into the family. But the first day that child demonstrates something like Bill Gates, like say he splits off a new company and becomes bigger than Microsoft and Apple and everyone compared, then someone will step back and say, well, for 30 years of his life, sure, he was a child of the Gateses. But now that he's done this thing, now he's really a Gates. Traits. So when you start demonstrating the traits, then it's sort of a sense it proves your inheritancy of where those traits came from. Here he's saying we have neither one, and yet that's God's love for you that he points to you and he says, my child, when you don't deserve it. That's why John is just blown away by this. Who of us deserves to stand up in front of God and say, please adopt me and call me your child? No, you don't want to try that. And yet, in John's astonishment, he says, you're called the children of God, and so you are. Literally. Think more literal in all of this. Origin or trait? Well, neither. It all comes from God. And so now we have a new origin and a new trait that comes from him. This is the reason why the world doesn't know us, because it didn't know him. So in a real sense, you have now, when you've literally become a child of God, have started to demonstrate traits that you didn't have before you were adopted by him. And as those traits that are godlike are being worked out in you, not because you're working really hard to imitate God, but because he's working that in and through you. You find that in the passages. As this stuff pops out, people will look at you and say, you're not from around these parts. Normal people don't act like this. Why are you acting? In fact, you're acting so unlike all of humanity. Where does that come from? That's why they don't know you, because they didn't know him. When Jesus came and demonstrated those traits, people loved him for those traits, but they said, he's not from around here. He's unlike anyone else we've ever seen before. And those traits of inheritance, because you are born of God, are what start to isolate you from the world because they don't recognize God. They don't recognize what he's doing in your life. So that's just all that is. Romans 8. Oh, Romans 8. Romans 8. Let me just show you some stuff. We didn't read this before. For all who are led by the Spirit of God are sons of God. Starting to hint at the idea that this birth process you've gone through with God has something to do with the Spirit. And that's key right here, because I'm saying think more literally about sons and children. The literal part that makes the difference is the involvement of the Spirit. That's what changes everything. For all who are led by the Spirit of God are sons of God. For you did not receive the spirit of slavery to fall back into fear, but you have received the spirit of adoption as sons, by whom we cry, there's that Ab word, Abba, Father. It's like daddy in that particular sense. So because of what the Spirit has done in your life, in giving you literal new birth, and you are adopted in his family because you didn't qualify through blood descendancy, but you were adopted, right? It doesn't mean your relationship with God is any less than the blood adopted ones, blood descended one. You are actually in the position of childhood with God, where you can come to the nearest, most intimate position with God, and you can say to him, Abba. You are not a second-class citizen as an adopted child. All it's saying basically is that you weren't born into this from man. You were born into it by God himself, through his Spirit. And he goes on and he tells you one more. The Spirit himself bears witness with our spirit that we are children of God. It's what the Spirit's doing that testifies to the fact that you have gone through another birth. And because of that other birth that's key through the Holy Spirit, a real birth. Now, we're not talking metaphorical, a real birth through the Spirit. Then you can be called children of God, and then you can come to the intimacy of God himself and say, Abba, Father. Now that, see, to John when he wrote that originally, that's just like, wow, this is craziness. Who can stand in the presence of God and not be evaporated because of our own sins? No one. And yet because of what he's done in giving you new birth through his Spirit, you can and come into his presence. Okay, I'm going to close with this right here. Jesus, early in John's Gospel, has a meeting with Nicodemus. There's a painting by one of our favorite Bible painters, Tissot, James-Jacques Tissot, in the late 19th century. So Nicodemus comes to him late at night and basically asks him an open question, and Jesus doesn't answer the question he asks. He just goes to the core of the issues. And you know this passage really well, I hope. John 3, here's John 3:6. Jesus is talking to Nicodemus. That which is born of the flesh is flesh, but that which is born of the Spirit is spirit. You have to have this other birth, and that other birth qualifies you to become a child of God. And just in case, he really takes it to Nicodemus and he says, don't marvel that I said to you, you must be born again. Now we take that phrase born again and we religiousize it and make it into anything we want. But literally all Jesus is saying is the birth that you've all experienced when you were born as babies, okay, that's one birth, but that's not enough. If you want to be a child of God, you have to have the second birth. It's essential. And that second birth, and Jesus goes through it in this passage in John 3, that second birth is effected through the Holy Spirit. But it's a real, literal birth. It's not a fleshly birth. In fact, Nicodemus asked that. I don't think he's kidding. He says, well, so how am I supposed to go back into my mom? I mean, what are you talking, He said, no. And Jesus even takes him to task because he says, and you're a leader of the Jews and you don't know this? What? So from Jesus' perspective, this should be a commonplace idea that the Jews who know the Old Testament should know. There's the fleshly birth that you have, but then there's a real, even probably more real birth that you have, literally through the Spirit. And because of that birth, it qualifies you to be literally a child of God. Literally a child of God. Not metaphorically, literally a child of God. And then as you grow after that point, after he adopts you, his Spirit again, which started the process that brought you to him, continues to work through you, and you start showing traits of your Father because of what the Spirit does inside of you. That's the backbone of the entire New Testament. That's the backbone of the Old Testament as well, is that. So when you look at sons and fathers and children and stuff like that in the New Testament, don't go all metaphorical on us. Go literal. Because you literally have been born a second time. And that literal birth worked through the Holy Spirit. And because of that Holy Spirit, you now have spiritual descendancy, not blood descendancy. And now you're starting to demonstrate the traits of your new Father. Think literally, because that's exactly what it is. It's exactly what it is. Let me go back and review before we quit. So we had those 4 titles for Jesus. Son of Joseph. That's just the literal, blood descendancy of his father. Son of David, well, blood descendancy from King David, which is true. David was of the tribe of Judah, and so was Jesus. Son of Abraham, which we looked at. Son of Abraham, literally the same thing again. He's from the nation of Israel. Son of God. Literally a son of God. His origin is God himself, and his traits are God himself. So many passages where Jesus said, listen, what you heard me say, I'm not making this up. I got this from the Father. Direct traits. What you see me doing right here, I'm doing what the Father showed me to do. Direct traits. Jesus was a direct descendant of the Father himself, perfect in every way, replicating the Father's thinking, the Father's words, and the Father's actions. Indistinguishable, so that when Philip says, Jesus, show us the Father, he goes, hey! If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. Because my traits perfectly match back to my Father from whom I've inherited these things. Right? My Father. So we're exactly the same. So, and now when you start to cook into this whole idea of the Son of God, you cook into it the whole idea of, remember last week we talked about firstborn? Well, not only is Jesus literally a son of God in that particular sense, in a spiritual sense, but he's the firstborn. He's the chief. He's the chief. And then you take that idea about being the chief of all those who have descendancy from God, the chief, and then you add in there another phrase that's used of Jesus, the only begotten or the only one of a kind. The monogenes is the word that's used. It's the only one. So now you have someone who has perfect descendancy from the Father, perfect replication of traits and origins and everything. Someone who then is also the chief of all, and I'm the only one of all. And then suddenly when you look at Jesus with all those titles put together, you realize that this son isn't just a son. He's like a perfect identity with the Father himself. There's nothing really that distinguishes him, really. The one thing that's different about Jesus, he's also a son of man. What does son of man mean literally? Born of man. You're a human being. And this is the distinguishing factor of Jesus, is not only he fully God in every respect, but he's also fully man. There's nothing artificial about his manhood. He is flesh and blood. You prick him, he bleeds. He really does. He's full human as well. Now, when you go back to places in the Old Testament, I want you to key off this as the years go on. Look for Son of Man, Son of Man, Son of Man. Because it's obvious that you would call Jesus the Son of God. That makes a whole lot of sense because he's really unlike anybody else. But Son of Man, it's emphasizing his humanity. It's emphasizing his humanity. Why would you use that? For instance, and I'll give you one, and this is your homework if you want to check it out. Daniel 7. Daniel's in captivity with the rest of the Israelites in Babylon. And Daniel 7, he starts off, he says it's the first year of the king Belshazzar, I think it is. He goes through this dream that he has. And in this dream, he sees the coming and going of 4 great kingdoms on earth. Spooky match to the 4 kingdoms that would come and go after him. But then near the end of that, he talks about this one supreme ruler whose kingdom will never end. His kingdom will never end. And when he describes this one whose kingdom will never end, of course he's looking forward to Jesus. Do you know what phrases he uses? Not son of Joseph, not son of Abraham, not son of David, not son of God. Son of man. And that's what makes this so fascinating, because he says, there's one coming after all these things. His kingdom will never end, and he'll be a man. That's why it's a shocker. And he'll be a man. How can someone whose kingdom never ends be a man? And when you read that phrase, son of man, in the context of what he says there in Daniel 7, 14 or 15, somewhere around there, it blows your minds, because you should be talking about God. But he's a man. Son of man. So keep your eyes out for the Son of Man, because it emphasizes the humanity of who Jesus is, which is important when you're talking about him being fully God and fully man. So, whew, crazy stuff. I think I'm done. Yeah. Next week we're going to talk about the Word. We don't know this one at all. Trust me. we've got a little bit of inkling about this. But if you think a word is something that you type on your computer, you got it all wrong. So we're going to talk about that next week. This, by the way, this is my second favorite of all these in this series of Word. It's just a total mind blower. I've wanted to write a book about this because it's so fascinating. So hold on to your seats. We'll do this next week, and we'll talk about the Word and why, when the way John uses it and so many uses it, blows your mind. Just blows your mind. Whew. Let's quit. It's getting kind of hot in here. Is that because I'm talking too much? Is it my hot air? Is it the lights? It's a bit warm. Okay, let's pray and we'll sing one last song. I think how great the Father's love. That you should be called the children of God. Astonishing. Okay. Father in heaven, we thank you so much for calling us to yourself. We are still astonished in our hearts that while we didn't deserve it because of blood descendancy or because of any traits that we've demonstrated, we had nothing to say that we were your child. And yet, because of your love, you look at us and you declare us your children. How is that possible? How is that possible? And so at the end of the age, around the great table of celebration, the great banquet at the end of all things, we have a seat at that table because of what you've done for us, and not because we're anything really great, but because you can look across the table and say, well, you're mine, you're my child, of course you deserve to be here. And it's all because of what you've done for us through Christ. It's astonishing. It truly is astonishing. So, Father, have this truth work its way into our hearts, to give us an understanding that we're not just metaphorically your children, we are literally your children because of the work that your Spirit has done inside of us. Literally your children. So thank you for that, and we pray that as this week goes on, you challenge us about the Word too. How is it that we don't understand or do understand, and change us as a way as you unveil to us what the Word's all about. So thank you for this wonderful opportunity to search out your Word. It's a delight to our hearts. And wow, you call us your children, and we are. That's just astonishing. So we thank you for this time together in Jesus' name. Amen.